there's so many areas in tech that are advancing so quickly and actually capturing, users and solving things for people. So I think that's why I'm optimistic about at least tech and the market, but with a caveat that, macro can always lead to unpredictable outcomes.
Before we start this podcast, this episode is sponsored by Zeta Markets. So if you want to trade perps without giving your coins to centralized exchanges, Zeta gives you all the benefits of your favorite exchange with self-custody and transparency. Trade perps with leverage, backed by Solana speed, scalability, and almost no gas fees. The link is in the description. Let's get back to the video. Actually, even welcome to the Gut Show. How's it going?
It's going well. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me, man.
Awesome. Straight to the first question. What is your origin story and what were you doing before crypto?
So my origin story is actually I started in corporate law doing M&A for about 5 years before getting into crypto, mostly focusing on restructurings and corporations and structuring M&A transactions. And I thought legal profession was interesting, but it always felt like, it was sort of in the consultancy realm, and so it never felt right for me. But generally, there was some meaningful work around it, but generally it felt like, you weren't really changing the world while you were at it. And so I was kind of looking for the next thing for me. And it already, like, even in my legal work, I started off working for larger firms and sort of being part of that, and then I transitioned to actually having my own legal practice with like a sort of more startup style, as opposed to working for a large corporation. And so they're already like origins of my kind of startup life were already there. And then at some point, around 2017, I learned about crypto, like, for the first time in a meaningful way like during that sort of cycle. And I was at a larger firm at the time, and I was like, a few clients were asking, advice in terms of how to invest and what was, what even was a blockchain, and how does it all work. And 2017 boom cycle has finished, and I kind of, just dangled my feet in crypto, and then took a break for a couple of years, and came back to it meaningfully around 2020, specifically looking at governance and like governance tooling on Ethereum, being really curious, how that could disrupt even, my legal profession, as well as just really, is it even possible to rethink organizations? Like, that was kind of the big question for myself. And after, dealing for years with corporate structures, and, DHLing corporate resolutions around the world, that seemed like an interesting thing to look at. And so early 2021, I learned about Solana. In a few weeks, I joined the Discord, and the Solana season hackathon was rolling around and being announced. And Solana hackathon formation chat seemed like a place to be. There were tons of people. Everybody was really open to sort of discuss ideas. And my thing was that, okay, if I am to build something, I need a technical co-founder, right? I need someone to be the lead developer and technical lead for this. And I got my friend and co-founder now on board, Danny, who comes from finance. And so we had this, I had like kind of operator legal experience. He had finance for his background. And so we needed somebody technical. And so we joined the Discord, and I think we just sent like a 2-pager in the formation chat saying, this is who we are. We're thinking about building something related to governance on Solana. We think Solana is awesome. If it sounds like it, if it sounds interesting, come and talk to us. And so about 30 people joined the Zoom call that we set up for this. And one of those guys was talking about Jira and sprints. And it seemed like he knew how a software development process works. And that was Sean, our third co-founder, who ended up joining us. And so we basically put together a very simple idea, like an MVP that we wanted to ship for the hackathon. So that happened around May 2021. We didn't win anything in the end, but ended up sort of working nights and weekends on this as sort of like a side project, and managed to raise a sort of pre-seed round end of August, and went full-time building out squads from September 2021, and has been at it ever since now.
Awesome. How is the student life as like in legal in a law college?
I mean, you need to read a lot, and it's really, the lectures, from what I remember, had really like low value for me. It's mostly you need to read, and then you need to make sure that you're able to sort of convey the information in a coherent way that you just consumed. And it was tons of information, and it was interesting. It was very like it never felt really practical, that part. Once I started actually working in law, um, it felt like I needed to learn a lot just from like how actually legal practice works as opposed to sort of theory. But overall, I think it's a good background, and it also forces you to be able to convey your thoughts very clearly, and also it forces you to have attention to detail and really make sure that like you catch all the right things. Because like a lot of the exams closer to the end would actually have like basically a case presented to you where you would actually have to evaluate certain things. And so yeah, attention to detail, and then like throughout the legal work itself, it's even more paramount. Like once you're working with documents, that becomes even more essential, where like good drafting in law is hard to come by, but it's a necessity, absolutely. And that actually helps throughout life in general. Like you become quite meticulous with everything, right? Like and even when you're like running a startup, obviously that's super helpful, right? Like be it somebody is presenting a thread to publish on Twitter, like you want to make sure that like all the full stops are in the right place, all the paragraphs are correct, and that like all the information you want to have in there is actually there. So I think in many ways that's probably like the two main things is like, yeah, I mean, making sure you structure your thoughts clearly, and then attention to detail. Those are probably the two main ones that kind of got out of it. But the process itself, I actually did my law school in London, and so for me it was English law, and it was a pretty, yeah, I mean, it was a pretty great experience. I spent a bunch of years living in London and learning English law.
What has been your best and your worst decision?
I think one of the best decisions I made very early on was to start working while I was completing like one of the last years of law school, because like it really shifted the perspective for me on many levels. And it was one of the first decisions I like completely owned and made myself, and like I did it against a lot of advice kind of I had around at the time. And so that's something I remember as like one of the starting points. And then yeah, I think there were a bunch of great decisions that I think were correct along the way, and like up until now. But that was definitely one of the first ones where like I decided, no, I actually want to try it for myself as soon as possible, and like an opportunity presents itself, and I kind of decided to manage it together while getting law degree and actually working. And that really like put me in the put things in motion for me, and like kind of in many ways brought me where I am today. In terms of bad decisions, I mean, there's so many, right? Like you make mistakes all the time. I think in terms of career, definitely I don't know if it's like completely if it's like a single decision, but when you're studying, at least when I was studying, I definitely felt like I had a very, very clear understanding what I thought was important when I was studying and what I thought wasn't, and I only pursued things that I thought like were relevant for my career. And so I think if I was more open minded at the time and actually went there to get education, and not just education for like a specific thing, but actually to be an intelligent, well-rounded, educated person, it would have been like the experience of studying would have been different. So I think like that was definitely something I regret now. And there were certain subjects that I find super interesting now that at the time I felt like I just wanted to kind of run through as soon as possible. So yeah, I don't know if that answers
Yep, that answers
the
the
actual
question.
question, but yeah.
Cool. So if you had a time machine, like what would you change?
I think I would tell myself and affect the change in my past to actually potentially get entrepreneurial sooner as opposed to later. That's one, and the second one is learn math as early as possible, and actually because I kind of focused on the humanities and on other things, and that's one of the biggest regrets in general, that I was pretty good at it at school and I could have pursued it. And I feel like now, like talking to so many people that are really good at math, obviously as they become pretty good developers, I feel like it structures your thinking so well, better than any actual course on like how to write well or how to think through and like build arguments. And so, and then obviously I'm fascinated by engineering in general, and like I probably would be interested to pursue some kind of computer science course if I had a kind of an option to do another go, basically how it's studying. So those are the things that come to mind. With the time machine, I probably would pay more attention to math early on, and potentially get into into more of an engineering to obtain basically more of an engineering background as well. It doesn't, at least in my job today, it feels like everybody doesn't need to be a developer, but if you are, that doesn't hurt at all.
So why did you choose law over engineering?
I think at the time I was still figuring out what I wanted to do. I mean, all my family is are lawyers, like my father, my grandma, my aunt, and then my grandfather as well. So it's pretty much everybody. It's kind of a family thing. And at the time, I felt like, well, I can actually. They all found something in it, right? They find it interesting, they find it exciting, they have a community built around this job, and so I was like, okay, well, I need to dig in, right, and figure out what it is. And I tried it for myself. I spent a bunch of time, a bunch of years doing this, and it just turned out it's not for me. But I felt like it would help to figure it out, and so I spent a bunch of years doing that. Now, with everything that I know and I experienced, yeah, probably going in a different direction would have been more fun for me. Yet, you never know, right? It's what it seems in hindsight. At the same time, though, a lot of the skills I obtained through that help me do things I do today, and so I'm kind of grateful that it happened as well.
How was the shift to being a founder?
It was actually pretty natural because by that time, the only thing that was new is actually getting really into the depth of the development, like software development process and all the intricacies that go with it. But the actual transition from running my own legal practice to running a startup were it was pretty close. Like it was a similar experience in many ways, and dealing with investors and like that was pretty familiar as well because in my legal work I've dealt with a bunch of sort of large corporations, a lot of funds, and so that part always seemed pretty natural to me. Like even deal making itself and like putting a round together, so those things felt pretty easy. And also, granted it was a crazy time in the market as well, so not it wasn't just me, right? And so I think in terms of getting familiar with how to build software was a learning curve. But I'm grateful that we had Sean because he wasn't just trying to like get things done, but he also wanted to make sure that we understand everything that's going on. And today, like I always say, I'm a non-technical co-founder, yet I understand the things I need to understand. I understand really well, right? And like I know, and so I can kind of comfortably speak about a lot of technical aspects of what we're building, and I actually like know what I'm talking about. And so that's I think mainly I think that's Sean's win, that I got to that place because he really put in a bunch of cycles early on to make sure that like we understand what's going on. So the transition was, and also like it felt things were so crazy, like everything was happening so quickly, and you really get like I get pretty competitive early on, and I get also very like focused on getting things done, and I like winning. And so once we kind of got off to actually do it full time, we're off to the races, and everything felt like it needs to get done right now. And so there were a lot of mistakes along the way, but there was no time to like reminisce or think about, well, how did I do this? Like you just need to get it done. And so we did that.
So how was your life in legal?
It was long hours. You mostly it's in many ways again that's similar to startup life. Like it kind of consumes you, particularly early days in larger law firms. It kind of consumes your life, and your life is centered around the job as like opposed to being other way around. You sort of there are many days you stay up till 4 or 5 a.m. in the office, because the deadlines are always kind of crazy there. Mostly early on, you work a lot with documents, don't deal too much with clients, yet I kind of always felt like I was good at it, so got to deal with clients pretty early as well. Yeah, I mean, there isn't much life, to be honest, when you work in law. I think at least like in the early days, and you kind of spend most time in the office. That said, though, people you work with are really smart, really dedicated, and it's also it definitely helps to that you're not alone doing this. Like there's a bunch of people around you that are there exactly for the same reasons, and they care about getting it done. They care about kind of doing it right. And lawyers like sometimes get like a bad rap or like presented in a kind of strange light. But I think at least when you're in these like early positions, you have very clear tasks. You just you need to get this document to the finish line, or you need to like make sure that whatever like a liability shield for the client is just right. And so I think in that case, there isn't much like there isn't anything immoral there for sure. It's purely like people trying to make sure that they do the best job, and that's super inspiring, and it still is, right? Like I'm in contact with a lot of the folks that I worked at the time, and a lot of my sort of employees when I started my own practice. I think they're super inspiring people because how dedicated they are. I think it kind of matches the how I see developers as well. Developers are much more mission driven though, and also they're I think development is centered around like solving hard problems, and that's what developers like the most, at least in my experience. In some ways, it's similar to law, but you feel I think in development, in software development, you actually feel the wins much more, right? Because like the app didn't work, now it works. This thing wasn't optimized, now it's like super fast and it works great and people are happy. So I think in that respect you kind of see the output much clearer, and that helps you like to keep going. I think that part is missing in legal life a bit. Like you can get maybe in after a year you get an article in a newspaper that this deal has been complete and this firm has worked on it, but I guess it's not as fulfilling as when you build something from something that didn't work, like you solve a real problem. And so I think in that case it's what I'm doing now. Yeah, I get a lot more fulfillment out of this than I did in the legal profession.
So you worked in merger and acquisitions. So how does it work from a legal point?
I mean, it's a super broad space. Like it can mean M&A can mean so many things. There's also like multiple components to M&A. There's sort of a commercial component to it. There's a legal component to it. So I worked on the legal side. So by the time that lawyers get involved, at least like the core commercial terms, like a term sheet is usually signed, or like basically the core commercial terms are identified, like how much we're buying this asset for, and like there's a bunch of ways to structure this as well. Like you can buy in M&A sort of, it's usually structured through like a share acquisition or like direct asset acquisition. So like if you want to buy a piece of land, you can either buy it directly or you can buy a company that owns it, and so that kind of dictates a lot of the structuring around what you're going to be doing. I think so once the term sheet is signed, you understand, okay, these are the core terms. They come, the client comes to the lawyers and says, look, I want you to draft the document. Sometimes the other side does the first draft, doesn't really matter. And then there's like a lot of back and forth between the two firms, basically kind of discussing the legal terms. Once, if you like work at a large firm that has been doing this for like 100 years, like 50 years, and particularly if you're dealing like with English law, it's actually kind of interesting because like you actually know all the points you're going to be disagreeing about with the other side, or at least most of them. Like these clauses, and it's more about like who has a better sort of position to argue. And I think that's one of the big benefits in paying these like huge fees to lawyers. Because there's multiple layers to why people do this, but when you're dealing with such a large firm, and on the other side is the other firm is as qualified, it's usually like actually gets things done quicker, because everybody knows like there's no time to explain. Nobody needs to spend the time to explain like the basic stuff, like the basic concepts. And so you negotiate the document for a while, and then once everybody sort of agrees on the final draft, it's executed. And then really depends on the structuring of the transaction. Sometimes it can take a long time to actually complete it, right? There would be like some condition precedent that you need to fulfill before you can say that now transaction is actually complete. So like signing and completion sometimes can have like huge gaps, and then lawyers can assist along the way throughout that process to actually facilitate, basically confirmation that, a certain condition that has been identified in documents is now satisfied, and like we can proceed to the next one, and eventually you run out of them, and that means okay, that sort of constitutes completion of the transaction. There is sometimes a lot of creative work if you're doing like a first draft and it's kind of a more weird transaction, like the structure is interesting. There can be a lot of creativity involved, but that also means like there's tons of people involved around you as well. Like you have like financial advisors, you have tax advisors, you have like commercial sometimes advisors, depending on who's doing the transaction, right? And so I think it's a lot of moving parts. The scale sometimes can be really big, like the numbers in the documents can be really big. Though you don't really feel it in any way, right? You're just working on something, and then like it takes forever as well. Like the transaction sometimes can take like a year, and sometimes you can be working on just that one, depending on how big it is and like how complex it is. Sometimes you can work on multiple at the same time. Yeah, I actually been thinking a lot lately how potentially like what can actually disrupt that part of the process. I mean, like definitely, I think AI and sort of can definitely help you with templates and with drafting. And also, like most legal firms actually have like a local basically like they have local storage of all their drafts that they have been like accumulating for years, and it's usually like it's a huge proprietary thing, like it's protected by obviously IP laws, and they take like really great care of it. So I guess like if you take an LLM and train it on these templates, it will also be able to like produce documents that are, like that would look like they would be produced by that firm specifically. So I think that kind of is something I've been curious to see, like who's going to do that first. And the crypto side, not sure exactly what it is yet. Like smart contracts can substitute certain things, but not like large scale M&A transactions, I think today. But at the same time, though, we're like there've been attempts in the previous cycle on like DAO to DAO M&A, which I saw. I think like Prime DAO was trying to do that, like basically token swaps and platforms that arrange for that. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, I think M&A is still a very interesting area. But that said, though, I'm pretty glad I've transitioned from it.
What do you think about squads in next 5-10 years?
On a 5-year horizon, we're really like, I think all of these kind of projects on Solana today, we're all kind of in step with Solana and its development as well. And a lot of the work that we're doing is centered around facilitating the new things that are happening on Solana and the developments in the L1 architecture itself. And so I think you can really map a lot of the work we're doing right now with the Solana roadmap as well. Kind of adding support for things that Solana starts to support. I think the long-term vision for squads, at least on a 5-year horizon, though, is that it is the definitive smart contract wallet layer for SVM. So, potentially like seeing these kind of rollups pop up and being SVM kind of starting to get traction outside of the actual like Solana as a chain itself. But definitely that's one of the main goals for us, is to make sure that, squads protocol, because we also differentiate a lot in terms of like protocol and the product. So on the protocol side, we want it to be the definitive smart contract wallet layer for the ecosystem, and basically acting as a source for whether you want to multi-sig, whether you want to leverage account abstraction capabilities for your like a wallet product or whatever it is. So on the protocol side, that's really the core goal. That's where we're seeing it today, and I think the protocol is really SVM native. There is no plans or even desire to scale it beyond, just because it's so intertwined with the way Solana works and Solana's architecture. So on the protocol side, that's how we're thinking about this. On the product side, it's the way we kind of been discussing it lately, particularly as well, is that the product is really becoming this core tool for management of two types of assets. One is developer assets, as we call them. That's your program, your validator, your token that you eventually launch. There's also like a transaction builder component to it that allows you to create custom transactions, populate them with arbitrary instructions. And the second type is treasury assets, right? Like that's kind of more familiar, where multisigs were used previously. And we definitely want to, in the 5 to 10 year horizon, make sure that on the developer side, if you're joining Solana ecosystem to build a project, Squads is really there as your core tool, which aggregates all the core assets that you need to manage while you're actually building on Solana, and provides the best experience possible. So it's all happening within this intuitive and sort of single interface. On the treasury side, and we're positive that Solana is gonna deliver on that long-term vision of actually bringing you sort of whether it's kind of NASDAQ speed, or at least the experience of trading on chain comparable to like centralized exchanges. We definitely want to be Squads, the product, to be like the onboarding layer for larger players, right, that come into Solana ecosystem to trade on chain. We want them to self-custody their assets in a multi-sig. Potentially we can in the future provide some kind of semi-custodial relationships, if that's something that because there are some requirements legally for some of the institutions, for instance, to do that. But we definitely see Squads as this onboarding layer, really, for people that want to bring a lot of liquidity on chain. They want to store it securely on chain and then deploy it into different DeFi protocols or interact with Solana ecosystem kind of on a wider scale. This is where we see Squads as kind of entry point for these kind of users.
What do you think about like MPCs for self custody against like multi-sig for self custody?
I think it's just a different way of approaching the problem, and as it always happens, there's different trade-offs to both infrastructures, right? So with the smart contract wallet infrastructure, I think one of the biggest benefits is that everything is happening on chain. You can see it happening on chain. And when I'm using a multi-sig, be it Squads on Solana or Safe on Ethereum, I know the exact logic that controls the way my assets are managed and secured. And so I can see it all on chain. I see all the signers. I can check the code. I can see the program is right there. When it comes to MPC, a lot of that stuff is taken off chain, right? And that solves a lot of the UX issues. That, however, means that you're relying a lot more on a Web2 stack. You're relying a lot more on a provider, right? Because if today Squads is gone, the Squads Labs disappears tomorrow, the program will still be on chain. Everything will be on chain, and we actually have a CLI tool that allows you to access it instantly. But we're also going to deploy a UI on IPFS, so it's always there, right? If something happens, if I'm an MPC provider that does custodial, semi-custodial, doesn't matter, you're fully reliant on, as a user, on me being around, right? And so I think in that sense, we see that both infrastructures will live on and be useful, right? So I think I'm kind of seeing that smart contract wallets definitely are useful for developers much more meaningfully than MPC, right? So if you want to do program upgrades, if you want to basically already manage these assets that kind of all exist on chain anyway, it makes a lot more sense to package them together in a multi-sig and a smart contract wallet, and you have the logic kind of locked in on chain. If you want to trade multi-chain and have a kind of intuitive UX with a 2FA recovery, for instance, then MPC potentially for smaller amounts can be useful, right? So I think there's room for both. And the other thing that always gets mentioned with smart contract wallets when they compare it to multi-sigs is programmability of it, right? Because we can basically really define, you can really define so many things around your multisig, and we're making it even easier in the things we're going to be shipping with V4 to make sure that it's super tailored towards what you're looking for in a setup of this kind of potentially multiple keys controlling a bunch of assets. And with MPC, that's just not possible, right? So something we can do with a multisig, for instance, we can program that a certain key can only execute or can only sign or can only initiate, right? And you can then go and play around with a more complex structure where sort of different owners on the multisig have different rights and kind of tailor it towards the organization. And so with MPC, there's limitations around it. But that said, we're definitely interested in how this space evolves as well. And yeah, I mean, you never know. Maybe we will explore it in some capacity as well. But for now, we're focusing on smart contract wallet infra. And yeah, we're pretty happy with it.
What do you think are some of the solutions for in case there is one of the multi-signers loses their keys? So if you see in banks in a joint account, if the other person is dead, the other signer gets the money. Are there any solutions for in case of someone loses their key or the other signer is maybe dead?
It depends on just you can really again set it up however you want. You can rely on I think we're going to see a lot more sort of providers in the space as well, where if you want somebody to act as a 2FA provider or somebody to act as provide your recovery service, right? That's depending. So I think that's how Fireblocks with MPC works right now, with you lose X amount of keys, up to a certain point they can help you recover it. If you lose more than the threshold that they tell you about, then even they can't recover it, right? Because they probably have one or two shards, right, depending on your arrangement. And so I think right now that's kind of how it's solved, right? You just make sure that there's a recovery component to it. There's enough people on the multisig right now. So in case somebody is unable to sign anything anymore, there's enough people to recover the funds, and you kind of manage the threshold, right? A lot of it is not super user friendly because you do need to think these things through, and actually, even I use a multisig for personal assets for some of them, and so I had to think through what's the setup that works for me, right? How to make sure that if something happens to me, the assets can still be recovered, right? And it's kind of doable, right? And I think it can get easier with solutions that we're seeing around. There's going to be more types of wallets popping up, and a lot of there's a hot wallet, right? There's a Ledger. You can also now have web wallets, which are basically linked to your email account, right? So I think using a mix of those as well can really help you to sort of diversify where the signers of the multi-sig and potentially allow you for recovery. But I also feel like it's a no-brainer that there will be a service provider for recovery as well. You just need to make sure that they're a signer on the multi-sig, and then um, the worst case happens, they can help you recover the assets. But it really is about kind of making sure that you understand your setup and you think it through in advance.
What are some new updates coming up soon on squads?
So the biggest one, in the nearest one, is v3 immutability. So we are doing final code cleanup. We did another audit just right now, sort of as like, it was less about finding security vulnerabilities. It was kind of going level above and thinking about social engineering issues. Like, what if one of the signers is malicious? Like, how can they exploit properties of the program? Again, not in terms of like breaking the code, but in terms of like doing something that the program allows already today, and we see it as fine, but can potentially cause an issue, or like brick a squad, or like create an issue for the assets. And so that's what the audit was about. And we're about to, I think, it's a matter of a few days before we actually burn the authority and v3 becomes immutable. And so that, combined with a bunch of audits, formal verification, completes its sort of arc that we started around July. That's when we started building it of last year. And so that completes the arc for v3. And then there's v4 development that's happening right now. Not really sure when v4 is actually going to ship, but there is it's going to be sort of a pro version of squads, where it has so many, like it's basically a lot more, it's a lot more programmable. It allows you to do a lot more things, in a sense that we're looking at sort of permissioning, dynamic thresholds. It will allow you sort of to transfer authorities like we had with mesh program, but now it's going to be sort of baked in. It will have our roles program baked in as well, so you can like define what a certain key can or cannot do. As I mentioned sort of before, like you can say that this one can sign, this one can only execute. And really v4 v3 already can be leveraged for like account abstraction purposes. Like you can actually build like an individual wallet on top of it, and basically have social recovery there, or multiple signers for approval of transactions. But I think v4 will even be like better positioned to it, because just again, you'll be able basically to program a PDA in even like more granular ways, as opposed to what you can do with v3 now. And so v4 is sort of the next big thing for us. At the same time, we're also working on Fuse, which is our own wallet built on smart contract wallet rails that sort of allows you to have a traditional wallet experience from an extension, eventually from mobile, but actually have multiple signers, and kind of it sort of wraps a multi-sig experience into an individual wallet one, and also acts as a companion tool for squads. Like if you have a squad on v4, you will be able to use a Fuse to actually like initiate transactions for a squad to approve, and then the users can choose if they want to approve them from Fuse, or if they want to approve them from our kind of main desktop UI that is squads. So Fuse and v4 are probably the biggest things. And then we're taking this time to do a lot of optimizations for our stack in general, make things faster, make things run smoother. And that's been like a lot of work on our end. v3 on the product side also is like, there's a lot of smaller updates, a lot of integrations, like we're working on integrating a bunch of protocols into it as well. So there's plenty to be excited about, but the larger ones is v4 and Fuse for sure.
What are Solana thesis?
It's been a very interesting few months, and I've spent really reflecting a lot on Solana's journey leading up to now, and how I think it will evolve. And I've actually come to be really excited and calm about Solana's future. I think a lot of the patterns and activity I'm seeing right now in Solana has surprised me, to be honest, because I thought after the FTX collapse there will be sort of a slowdown. People will take time to reflect, which I would totally understand. It happened completely opposite, in a completely opposite way, right? Like people just went crazy. There was Sandstorm Hackathon, now there's Grizzlython. Everybody's building. The teams that kind of were around before are doubling down on their projects and shipping the next versions and working on making the best experience. And so that's been exhilarating to see. And I've been a fan of Solana from day one, but that just reinforced the feeling I had. So that's sort of more like on the community and sentiment side. On the actual technical implementation, and like I think a lot of the decisions that Solana has done leading up to today have been incredibly smart in hindsight. I don't know if they like actually felt that way to Anatoly and the team when they were making them, but like I think one of the best things around Solana is that it has a very dedicated developer base that is actually dictated by the fact that shipping something on Solana and then transitioning it to other chains is very hard, and that Solana is very much like unique in its architecture. It's unique in how you actually develop software for it, and I think that's probably, I don't know if that was a design they like originally foresaw, but I think that played a huge role in making sure that Solana is around, that it has a lot of developers building things, just because it owns relationship with the developers, as opposed to sort of a lot of the EVM clones that don't, right? Because like or even rollups, right? Like eventually every potentially protocol will probably deploy on every rollup, will deploy on all the chains that support EVM, right? And so it kind of I think it leads to losing focus amongst the user and for developers as well. Like they don't really know which community they belong to. They just belong to sort of EVM or Ethereum. And yeah, I think in terms of that, Solana is pretty unique. And I think that will only grow. Like I think those effects of the effect of that will just, I think, only grow. My thesis also kind of revolves around the fact that I do believe that Solana is the chain to deliver like these very familiar to kind of basic user experiences that are not available in crypto right now. So I think what Solana provides from a technical standpoint is still unmatched in any other chain. And I think if we are to onboard, the next billion users, that probably will be Solana, and that's why we're sticking around and building here. And then on the mobile side, that again sort of proves the point, right? That the team has thought of that, you know, in the last cycle, and actually managed to put it together. And now, like, we're receiving sort of our developer copies and building mobile apps, and how it attracts potentially a whole new other side of things for developers that want to focus specifically on mobile, and also attracts new type of developers that originally thought like crypto wasn't really for them yet. And it kind of helps accelerate that part as well. So I think all those things combined will lead to a great future for the ecosystem. And but mainly my kind of sentiment and my thesis is centered around people. Like, I know the ecosystem really well. I know a lot of players in it, and I'm inspired by them all the time. And I think that's kind of the people is really probably the best reason to believe in the chain doing well, just because there's a lot of hard problems to solve, and if the people around you are dedicated and smart and have really like good intentions of actually like solving this, I think that's probably the most important thing. And that's my kind of thesis around Solana, because I do feel like it has that.
I agree. Yes, Sandstorm was like a really great. Like they built out the whole, like five people like built out a whole hackathon without the foundation support or like a lab support like on their own. So that was great. What do you think about the DAO world right now? So the last year there were like a lot of these DAOs pop up, like simp DAOs and uh, like some random DAOs which don't make sense. So what do you think about the DAO world now and like maybe in like next 1 2 years?
I think we actually like experienced as squads oversaturation of this like DAO space when it happened after Constitution DAO. Like Constitution DAO happened, people saw, okay, well, you can fundraise pretty easily for a cause through that mechanism. And there was like a lot of inbound requests on our Discord, like, how do I start a DAO? And we would ask like, what are you trying to do here? And it'd be like, well, I have this thing, I want to raise for this. I want to raise for this. Like, it really is what was around that like fundraising craze, which we weren't really fond of at the time. And I think like DAOs were a huge thing during Constitution DAO. Then they became again sort of things kind of slowed down. I'm very optimistic about them in general, though. I think specifically as they pertain to rallying people around social causes, as they pertain to governance of protocols. I think what you're seeing even right now with like what's happening with Uniswap and the vote that's about which bridge to use, and there's a lot of controversy and everybody's talking about it now. Um, I think it doesn't matter it doesn't matter what the actual like I think vote is about. Like, even for me, I'm not involved in Uniswap governance, but that like seeing the forum with 85 posts or whatever, every stakeholder making their case publicly, and then you can actually see all the voting happening on chain. I think that's a huge unlock. I think those are the fundamentals that we don't really see in traditional organizations, right? Like in traditional organizations, there's some boardroom decide something, and then we just find out about the decision. Here, you see the process how they got there, and again, like it could be, it's not just some small social DAO or like a small protocol that's just evolving. Uniswap is one of the largest protocols in crypto that has very sort of traditional stakeholders, right? Like a lot of the investors in Uniswap, a lot of players there, they have a lot of experience with dealing with traditional companies, and the fact that they're playing by the rules of crypto when it comes to this, and that they're doing it openly and transparently. And yeah, I mean, you can argue that there's whatever's happening behind the scenes doesn't matter, right? Like that's even what's happening today is already a huge unlock. And so I think that makes me optimistic about DAOs. I did feel it's like a huge step up in terms of how you can get things done. Sometimes the big question with DAOs for me is like when you actually decentralize, like when do you actually need to become a DAO? I think that's to be debated. In my kind of opinion, it needs to happen later. Like I think we have seen, particularly in the sort of Ethereum space, a lot of teams decentralize too early. That leads to, again, loss of focus, and basically, when you have a centralized team attacking a problem, building out a product or building out a protocol, solving a problem, it gets things done faster. And I think after that kind of part is complete, there's a great path to decentralization that you can take, which is gradual and has milestones and sort of makes sense to everyone. I think that's something I'm thinking a lot about. But overall, I'm optimistic. I think on Ethereum, as always been, there's more innovation in terms of DAO tooling, in terms of active DAOs, just because they've been around for longer and they've been at it for a while. I think on Solana, we're seeing we're going to see a renaissance of that at some point as well. Like there was a time with Grape and Mango where like there were actually again, there were real DAOs with decentralization and kind of open discussions and a lot of experiments around how to do centralized governance. So those are great examples. But I think right now there's a slowdown, which kind of makes sense because the ecosystem is in a place where it needs to focus, it needs to build, it needs to rebuild some things, it needs to build new things. For that, you need teams of 5 or 10 people that really want to solve a problem and eventually decentralize whatever they're building. So I think the timing makes total sense to me at this stage.
Gotcha. Also, what are your opinions on the current market state?
I think the market is, it was a kind of long overdue for a correction. We internally we're talking a lot about it, with my co-founders in terms of like how to manage, fundraising and what are we going to be doing in terms of when to raise the next round and how to think about this. And I think what's happening now is like I do feel like the hardest part of it is over. I think we're definitely going to see some ups and downs, and I don't think I don't think the fundamentals are there for like for like a whole next bull run. I think there still needs to be a lot, at least some time between that. I do feel like that the unpredictable part is macro, as it was recently as well. Like these things are happening at such a large scale that affect not just crypto, that affect everything, and so these are harder to predict. Like I'm not as comfortable commenting on that, but I do feel like the worst is kind of behind us. I also am curious to see whether, because there's like a lot of predictions around the next sort of, in the next few years, sort of capital drying up and, valuations going down. I think if you look at previous cycles and if you look at like how high things went previously, that's a reasonable assumption to make. But at the same time, I'm seeing so much innovation happen. I'm seeing so many talented people, start companies and solve problems and build new things that work, that I am curious whether that's actually going to be the case. Just because there's so many areas in tech that are advancing so quickly, and actually capturing users and solving things for people. So I think that's why I'm optimistic about at least tech and the market, but with a caveat that macro can always lead to unpredictable outcomes.
What advice would you give to someone who is interested in law?
It's not something you can take if you're not sure as a career path. Like I think definitely talk to people that are in the profession. Um, find be open to things, but definitely if you find an area of law that's interesting to you, definitely um, try to link it to your passion. Like if you decide to go into law, maybe you're interested in tech, so you can go and provide legal services to startups. If you're interested in um, you know commodities and natural resources, or there's so many like areas of law that kind of attach to different areas of business, that if there's like a passion for you in some way there, like definitely pursue that. And I think don't I've kind of I think the value of working in large firms is is great early on. Like it helps you to speed run through so many things and teaches you so many things. But definitely think about it as a startup in some way as well. And like if even if you want to pursue a legal career, there's room to innovate. There's room to build your own, be it a partnership or a business or a company that does these kind of services that is unique and provides things in a unique way. I think that's always been something I thought of if I stayed in legal profession, and that's what I was trying to do with my practice as well. Is there's room to innovate. Actually, there's a lot of room for it, and doing it from the inside is the best. And so I think that's definitely something to think about. That if you're interested in law, see maybe um, if something else is viable other than going to a law firm, like Big Law in the US, like a Magic Circle law firm in the UK, and just staying there for 20 years until you become partner. Because that's, I don't know, it seemed appealing early on, I think, but I don't think it is now to anyone. So definitely try to find something else in this.
Do you have any advice for bear market survivors?
How they say, like, just survive, right? That's what they always say. I do feel like I've been reading this book about like surfers mentality and how surfing can actually be a great mental model for your life. I think that's for bear market survivors. The advice is that there's always another wave, and you know that it's gonna come. You don't know when, but it's always gonna come at some point. And so you need to be prepared for it. You need to make sure that you're around for when it comes. And so just make sure you do things that put you in that position, and that um, while you're waiting for the next wave, you are also living, meaningful and sort of fulfilling life, and you're not just kind of there, putting your life on hold until that happens. I think those are the things that I kind of extracted. I do feel like, this bear market for me at least, it felt, in some parts of it were shocking, as for most of us, like in terms of FTX and other things. But in general, it felt like these things happen, and you just deal with it. And I'm lucky to be in a position where I get to focus on building stuff, and my livelihood is not dependent on trading or knowing what's going to happen with the markets, at least in a like direct way. And so that's like another thing where if you are in sort of in crypto, I think building things is a lot more fun than speculating on price. You can do both at the same time, but yeah, try to get involved in things and be active. And that's like to the question of DAOs. Like there's a bunch of DAOs out there you can contribute. There's a bunch of projects you can join. Um, yeah, so this experience is never going to hurt you, and can only, I think, bring you good things.
Awesome. What are some productivity tips you would like to share?
Oh, I mean, I took forever to figure out, like, to basically hack what works for me, and to like hack my productivity. And yeah, I mean, definitely that's probably the best advice I can give. Like, is understand what works for you. Like, learn. You can you can watch so many podcasts, you can read so many books, and if you're mapping it, if you don't actually know what to map it to in your own sort of constitution and the way you are thinking about things, and the way a lot of it is dictated by biology as well, and the way you're actually your body works too. And so that's why, like, make sure you understand how you work first before you start applying sort of other people's productivity hacks. What worked for me is really, I thought initially that it's all about sort of work with your mind and how you make, how you structure your mind, and how you make sure that you get things done on time and you get things done in the quality that they deserve. But what I figured out is there's so much of it is related to your body as well. Like, making sure that you're healthy physically leads to a lot of productivity, kind of when it comes to actually doing hard work that requires thinking and sort of, and requires that. I think the advice that I can give you that's very simple is that whatever you're trying to fix, be it productivity, be it other things, start with fixing your sleep patterns, because they will define pretty much everything. I figured that out too late, and I think I could have done a lot better with things if I figured that out earlier. But once I got that right, everything else seems much easier and fall into place.
Got it. What are some life lessons you would like to share?
I think the biggest one I've been thinking a lot about recently is that you have to, I think, depends on how you're being brought up, but you definitely, there is in society, there is a sentiment that sort of, authority, um, you know, people of authority or institutions that have authority, are always right, and that like there are certain ways of doing things, and that you need to go and make sure your life sort of maps to these patterns that are sort of predetermined, and of a way of doing things right, or a particular way that's been done before. It can be dictated by your parents, can be dictated by whoever. um, I think figuring out that, you need to actually, um, think about all these things yourself, and that there is no absolute truth in any of it, and that you actually need to critically think about what matters to you, and what gets projected on you, what kind of gets thrown your way, to make sure that, you're not just doing it because, there's certain authority that says that this is the way to go. I think that's sort of the biggest life lesson. Once you figure out that you can really, um, you really do control the way things are happening in your life, and there's a lot more control to it than you think, and it can be a lot more fun once you start shaping it around yourself, as opposed to mapping it to patterns that, you thought you had to follow. So think early about what you want and what works for you, and, focus on that, as opposed to, what others are trying to, get you to do, and project on you.
What is some alpha you would like to share?
I think the biggest one is that people talk about Solana DeFi being dead, and that like it's in a sort of weird place. It is maybe right now, but the alpha is that there's so much happening right now in the background. To Yeah, I'm actually really bullish, and I feel like if you are, if you do have some liquidity around that you're thinking where to deploy, like there very soon there will be, a lot of places to do it on Solana, and I think the experience is coming to really like a new, um, to a new level that we haven't seen. And so I don't know if it's not a direct alpha. It's more about like just sort of stay tuned for what's coming. But I am really bullish on Solana DeFi. Just talking to all the teams, that because a lot of the teams use us for various things in terms of, program upgrades or treasury management, and so you just get a lot of insights into what they're actually trying to do. And, I think that's the biggest alpha. Just don't sleep on Solana DeFi.
Yeah. What are some protocols you would like to give a shout out to, like in Solana DeFi?
Sure. Okay. Give me another half hour and we'll get through it. So I think, MarginFi, Clockwork. It's not specifically DeFi, but will help power a lot of things in DeFi. Drift, Zeta, Hubble, and Camino, obviously. I'm super excited about Ellipsis and what's coming there. Um, Jupiter, always kicking it. To be honest, like there isn't really, like I'm super excited about Hero and what they're doing. There isn't really like an active DeFi team in Solana that I'm not excited about. So these are the ones I mentioned, and I'm super pumped. But I think like from talking to all of them, like they're here right now, they're trying to like solve these problems, build cool shit, and that's enough for me to admire them at this stage.
Awesome. That's a really great list. Thank you so much, Stephen, for joining the podcast. It was great chatting with you. Yeah, talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me. Talk to you soon.